The King of the Pirates is back. Let's talk about it. Hey, great to have you here. So today we're going to be talking about One Piece live action season 2, recently released on Netflix. Just giving some overall general thoughts here. It's going to be kind of challenging to cover because there's varying degrees of fans of this franchise. You may have no prior knowledge of One Piece. You may have watched some of the anime. You may have watched all of it. You may have watched the live action season 1. So there's going to be varying degrees of background info that people have. So keep that in mind when I'm covering this season because it's going to be a little bit challenging trying to address the various amounts of background info people have with this franchise overall. And to share my own personal background, I've talked about this before on the channel, but I've watched about, let's say, 200 episodes of the anime. I got super into the trading card game. We did a lot of pack openings and stuff like that on the channel previously. There's actually some of the cards still back here. And One Piece overall, it's not my favorite anime, but for some reason it feels like it's the anime that I've consumed the most or digested the most outside of just anime. For example, I'm wearing One Piece shirt and hat today. I have like 3 other shirts. There's actually also a boat right there. So there's a lot of other One Piece products that I've indulged in and really enjoyed. So keep that in mind also. And I did really enjoy the first season of the live action. I probably would say I haven't watched all of the live action adaptations of animes, but in my opinion, it was the most faithful and best version, taking shot for shot from the anime to a live action format, which is pretty challenging because if you're familiar with One Piece, there's a lot of crazy stuff happening. I mean, there's a lot of animes that have characters flying around and unique character designs that are a little bit hard to translate to live action, but I felt like season 1 did a pretty good job of that, and it was my most anticipated show coming into 2026, actually, even more so than something like Dexter that I've covered here on the channel. So with all that in mind, at a high level, did I feel like season 2 was successful? I would say absolutely yes. They really hammered home a lot of those unique character designs here in season 2. The acting from everyone here, the previous characters and the new characters for this season, all across the board was phenomenal. I did also love how they continued what they did in season 1, where they had the wanted posters just showing up on the screen, kind of interacting with characters. They did that here once again, but not as much with the wanted posters, just more so with like a nameplate of one of the Baroque Works characters. And because I have watched this far through the actual anime, I did feel like it was a faithful adaptation from animation to live action. And with this once again only being an 8-episode season with an hour each per episode, I do feel like they crammed in a lot of information, but it didn't feel rushed. So I felt like they did a good job prioritizing what was important. And I felt like each episode pretty much completed one little smaller arc story, while also leaving you with a little bit of a tease for the next episode. So we started things off in episode 1 with our Straw Hat crew going to Loguetown, which is where Goldie Roger was from and where he died, which obviously has Luffy intrigued, so they head out there. And once they get there, all 5 of the crew kind of spread out their own separate ways. Sanji's off looking for fish, Zoro's off looking for swords, that kind of stuff. We're also introduced to a couple new characters here with Smoker and Tashigi. And Smoker's probably a great example of somebody who has a very unique power or just visual uniqueness. And I feel like they hit it out of the park as far as how his smoke came into play with his attacks and things like that. We do also get a throwback of some of the villains from the first season with Buggy and Alvida. And a couple of the unique differences between the anime and what we had here in the live action was that Bartolomeo had a little bit more of an appearance here, more screen time. It felt like in comparison to the anime, he was a little bit more integral to the story as far as this first episode went. And I do believe we also had a Sabo cameo here, who's a character that shows up later on in the anime. We do also get a little bit of a misdirect here. I don't want to spoil things for people who haven't watched the anime or read the manga, but there's a correlation that's made between Goldie Roger and Monkey D. Luffy that it feels like they're trying to do a little bit of a misdirect that will ultimately be shown the real answer later on, not in this season. From there, the Straw Hat Pirates then head out on their ship, and we get introduced to Miss All Sunday, who's a character who's also known as Nico Robin, and she's kind of the second in command in this organization called Baroque Works. We then have the crew accidentally run into this big whale named Laboon, and the ship gets swallowed by Laboon except for Luffy. So then we have Luffy off talking to this older man and get some background on Laboon, this bigger whale. And we also get a surprise difference here, also from the anime. We have an appearance from Brook, who once again comes later on, and he's also a character that is in skeleton form in the anime. We didn't have that here, so I'm curious when they show him again in future seasons, are they going to change his appearance? We'll have to see. And the rest of the crew who's inside this whale's mouth run into a couple folks from Baroque Works with Miss Wednesday and Mr. Nine. Luffy eventually rescues the crew from Laboon's mouth, and then they head to this nearby town called Whiskey Peak, which at first appears like a pirate-loving town, but they soon find out these guys are actually trying to bait them, trying to get them drunk so they can kill them. And here we're introduced to a few more characters from Baroque Works. They have a ton of people. There's a bunch of numbers. It can be a bit confusing if you're not familiar with the characters. But we ultimately find out that Miss Wednesday's name is actually Vivi, and she's the princess of Alabasta. And she's pretty much been working undercover with her bodyguard, Igaram. A couple of the Baroque Works people, Miss Valentine and Mr. Five, then show up, and then we have Vivi's bodyguard sacrifice himself so they can escape. And at the same time, we have this crazy scene with Zoro just killing 100 people inside this bar. It's some pretty cool choreography. It's kind of one of those scenes like almost like Lord of the Rings where Gimli and Legolas are having a body count as they keep killing people over and over.
That still only counts as one.
It's definitely one of those moments though that you have to realize this is an anime turned to live action, so you kind of have to turn your brain off a little bit with some of the realism. It's just meant to be fun. It's definitely intended to be over the top levels of fantasy. I mean, Mr. Five literally throws booger bombs. So from there, the crew escapes and they brought Vivi along with them, and they wind up then going to this island called Little Garden. And there's all kind of crazy stuff on this island. There's dinosaurs, there's these giants, and the crew winds up befriending these giants, and we realize they have this ritual where they fight each other, but they've never killed each other. They've always had a draw. But sure enough, one of the Baroque Works people sabotaged one of them, so the giants are a little bit out of commission here. And here's where we're introduced to a couple more Baroque Works people. We have Mr. 3 and we have Miss Golden Week. And Mr. 3 has these wax powers where he can turn stuff into wax, so he pretty much takes Zoro, Vivi, and Nami and tries to trap them within this wax, trying to make this statue. So he's a little bit more of an artsy person, and we get somewhat of a big name here with David Dastmalchian playing this role. Part of me wonders if he has any idea what's going on in One Piece, or if he just kind of took this role. Once again, though, the acting was great here, so he did a great job. And then we have Miss Golden Week, who paints our main characters with certain colors, and that pretty much puts them under a trance or this spell where they have to behave a certain way. Things pretty much wrap up there with an unlikely hero with Usopp kind of saving the crew and them escaping. However, unfortunately, we find out soon after that Nami gets really sick. So the crew takes her to this location called Drum Kingdom, and we learn about this corrupt king named Wapol, and he pretty much has been converted by Baroque Works and turned a little bit evil. They give him a devil fruit called the Munch Munch fruit that pretty much makes it so he can eat anything and convert it to other stuff. And separately in this town, we have Luffy bringing Nami to the doctor, and we get the whole backstory of this character named Chopper who winds up joining the crew later on. But it's this little cute reindeer that has this kind of tragic backstory. All of the penultimate episode is pretty much Chopper's backstory as far as how he kind of came to joining the doctor. And from there in the last episode, things pretty much wrap up with them defeating the evil King Wapol. They wind up leaving this guy named Dalton in charge. Nami winds up getting better, and as I said, they wind up bringing Chopper along to join their crew. And then at the very end, we get the final tease of Mr. Zero, the leader of Baroque Works, is this guy named Crocodile, who's going to wind up being one of our main antagonists in season 3. So I know I covered a lot of stuff, but that's pretty much the gist of things as far as the general main storyline. There are some other small differences between the anime and the live action, one of which is when the crew goes to Whiskey Peak. There's a scene in the anime where Luffy and Zoro wind up fighting each other. Doesn't happen here. I don't think it made sense to include that, so probably a good change overall there. It did also feel like we got a little bit more behind the scenes moments with a character like Smoker and all that he's doing with the Marines. Another smaller one is that Wapol's 2 lieutenants wind up kind of fusing together in the anime. Didn't do that here, but once again, didn't feel like it was totally necessary to do that. And the other thing I don't remember from the anime, but it kind of worked here in the live action, was Zoro would frequently early on in the season have these visions of Dracul Mihawk, who's a character from season 1, who wound up beating Zoro in a sword fight. And he's kind of just haunted by this and really wants to redeem himself and take him out. So whenever he's fighting somebody or just kind of walking around, he would see him in these visions as being like, oh, you're kind of over my shoulder a little bit, and you're my main goal of somebody to take out in the future. In my opinion, One Piece also has one of the best TV show theme songs and music scores. And along with that, each episode has a fun title card variation aesthetically unique to that episode. All in all though, as I mentioned earlier, it's really tough to do something with anime in a live action when you have all these crazy things happening on screen. But despite some suspension of disbelief, I feel like they translated things extremely well. Like even Wapol's mouth, he has this massive mouth and he's just trying to consume stuff. I felt like they did a good job kind of converting that to the live action. If I have some criticisms to point out, one of which is probably when Tony Chopper does one of his various forms, when he's kind of the buff version of him, I kind of feel like he looked a little bit goofy. It was somewhat similar to the anime, but it almost looked like Jim Carrey's The Grinch as far as kind of having that fur, but also that really human looking face at the same time. Base form Chopper looks great though. They did a really good job transforming it from the anime to the live action, and I'm glad they had his variations of forms, even if the buff one did look a little bit goofy. And then beyond that, probably not a criticism necessarily of the live action, but just more so One Piece as a whole. I probably prefer the storyline that's in the first season as compared to the various arcs here in season 2, but that is more so tied to the main source material. I just feel like some of the Laboon and the Baroque Works stuff and moments with the giants, I probably like a little bit less than like the Arlong stuff from season 1, but make no mistake, it's still phenomenal. So to sum things up, as mentioned, this was my most anticipated TV show coming into the year, and did it meet those expectations? Absolutely, and it may have even exceeded them at certain moments. The show really had charm, witty one-liners, just overall good comedic, but also awesome action moments. If I'm giving a review score, I was definitely leaning towards saying something like a 9. It's definitely very high quality TV, but as I'm talking through things, I think I'm actually going to give season 2 of the One Piece live action show a 10 out of 10. Does that mean it's perfect? No, it doesn't, but it does enough things right. And similar to the anime, it just feels like it's a feel-good time when you're along for the ride with Luffy and his crew. And honestly, even though I've taken a hiatus from the TCG, I'm kind of feeling like getting back into it after watching this season. But let me know down in the comments below if you've watched this season. What were your thoughts? Are you a fan of the anime, the manga, the live action, the TCG, the swag, whatever else? Let me know your thoughts on all things One Piece down in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to talk to you again soon.